When you say, Catholics get divorced, it has happened. There's a distinction between an annulment.
It's around, I looked it up before this, it's around 25, 35.
So that's how, yeah.
It's around, it's around 35%. And so that's not a small percentage.
What's the national average? Like 45% roughly? So,
well, 2024, it was 50.
Okay, so
I know everyone splits hairs over like the 5-10%, but regardless, it's not small.
So what that means then is that if you're a man, and I totally grant that dating pool's tough and the economy's tough and the divorce courts are terrible and divorce laws are terrible,
but they should sign up anyway.
Well, yeah, no. Before we even get to that, one way to mitigate one's risk in marriage of divorce would be to be just any old Catholic, right? Because you then reduce the likelihood of divorce by 16% immediately. 16 percentage points, much more than 16% from the 50% number. So then, what if you're Muslim? Divorce rates among Muslims, even a little lower, 30%. Divorce rates among Orthodox Jews, 30, as low. There's a lot of different kinds of Jews, but it goes down to as low as 10. And then you get down to a little more of the old school Catholics, which is kind of how I practice. There aren't great numbers on it.
Do you go to Latin Mass?
Traditional Latin Mass. Like.
Yeah. That's a lot of patience.
But frankly, I find it...
No, it's good. It's good. Latin Mass is a little better.
It seems like it goes faster than the shorter...
No, it's a little bit better in the Latin Mass. I'd agree.
But when it comes to divorce, the numbers are a little sparse here. It's like 5 to maybe 10%.
But the problem is with most of those stats, most of those studies were done before social media. Anyone that dated before and after social media knows it completely changed the game.
How do you mean?
Well, women now have access to men anywhere. And cheating goes up. Like dating, the number one way people are meeting under 30 is dating apps. I mean, this is a completely different dating marketplace than when you were dating.
Though I guess,
and that's my point.
When I was dating,
there's no Catholic woman in divorce court. Women will throw out their religion very, very fast when they want to leave. You cannot pray a woman that wants to leave you into not leaving you.
I think you don't the statistics I just cited show that you can? Because
no, but the problem with those is they include women over a certain age. The women under the age of 35 have been on. So yes, it's completely different.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think you can't really deny it with what you've seen. You go on whatever podcast. Are those the same women of our grandmothers and great-grandmothers? No, it's completely different.
There's not a ton of Orthodox Jews and traditional Catholics on that podcast, but and perhaps there's a reason for that.
And you got to ask like the reputation. What's the reputation of Catholic girls?
Well, what do you mean? I mean, again,
that's my point. My point is they have if there was an abundance of wives in church, Michael, the men would be lining up to go.
But they do. At the traditional churches.
Men are leaving the church. Under the age of 35, young men, church participation is going down altogether, but young men are leaving the church.
But what about the traditional parishes?
The traditional parishes...
They're exploding, and it's all young people. I mean, the median age is like 22 in these parishes, and it's largely young men. So I totally grant you that a lot of modern religion has become quite effeminate and has driven men away.
Right, but I'm saying the Catholic Church is not exempt. It's absolutely not exempt. I've seen a lot of the same trends in the Catholic Church.
I guess my confusion is, though, you bring up these statistics, and so then we acknowledge the statistics that show that if one gets married, assuming that divorce is not a sacramental reality, that the likelihood of divorce goes way down. But then when we say that, you instantly say, well, actually now the statistics aren't worth anything because young people are different.
Wait, say that again? Sorry.
So
wait.
We agree that the numbers for Catholics, Jews, Orthodox Jews and Muslims, divorce numbers are way lower. And you acknowledge those statistics, but then you say,
no, I don't. No, I don't.
You don't? Okay, all right.
No, because most of those include women over a certain age.
Right, you're saying the young people, it's totally different.
Time, Michael.
So what is...
And that's the same thing, like the time my parents got married in is completely different
So
than
what
the time
changed,
today.
other than now they meet on apps rather than at bars, and that's the big change? That's why we can't believe the statistics anymore?
Well, the average marriage is 7 years now, Michael.
Right, but we've had divorce, expanded divorce for a long time. We've had no-fault divorce in America since 1969. So, I acknowledge these are, by historical standards, relatively novel, but we're still talking like 50 years, right? More than 50 years.
I don't, I just think a lot of times I hear you guys' advice to go to church and find a good woman. And I don't necessarily think it's bad advice in general. But again, I think that times have changed. And I think a lot of times you guys are a bit out of touch with what the average man is going through in this country.
Well, what do you mean by the average man, I guess? Men come in all shapes and sizes. So, acknowledging the fears of the modern...
Do you think men have valid fears in getting married? Do you think any of it's valid, or do you think they're making it up?
Yeah, I think that marriage entails risk.
Okay.
But there are ways to mitigate risk.
There are
it's
ways,
a natural institution.
Correct. There are ways to mitigate risk.
Yeah.
But because I don't know, when you talk about this stuff, you guys are just sorry, I don't mean to say you guys, but
please, generalize. Sorry. It's okay.
But sometimes I'm just like, how do you not see where the men are coming from? I've talked to men that did the exact same thing. That they took you guys' advice to a T.
What's our advice? Our advice is just
to marry. I've seen a lot of stuff from the Daily Wire.
Yeah.
Okay, might be you, might be other guys that say get married young, right?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, but I'll see guys that take you guys' advice, and sometimes it ruins their life
because they get divorced.
And the divorce isn't like the woman ruins their reputation. Mm-hmm. Calls him an abuser. And even calls him an abuser, says all these awful things. He hasn't seen his kids in 2 years.
It's awful. Yeah.
And it's the saddest thing when you see a man that's going through a divorce.
So what's the alternative, though? Because I totally agree with you about the risk and the pitfalls of modern marriage.
Well, I think that the laws need to change first, because regardless of what I say,
before people get married.
Well, it's not about what I say; it's about what people will do. You guys have been preaching marriage for a decade. Men aren't signing up.
No,
men aren't. The rate of no, but the rate of getting married is going lower.
Right, but we also
men are getting married.
We redefined marriage at federal levels.
Correct.
We've also had divorce for 50 years.
Yeah, correct. No, you're right. You're correct. But I'm saying laws need to change. Personally, if it was Pearl's world,
yes.
And I think you're probably going to have to find somewhere that meets in the middle for something to pass. But if it was Pearl's world, I wouldn't have alimony. I wouldn't have child support. I don't think you're entitled to it.
Yeah, I would certainly eliminate no-fault divorce, and I would greatly restrict divorce broadly.
Yeah, but I think until you do that, you're going to have a hard time getting men to sign up. Until women get in shape.
Sure.
If 70% of women are overweight, that's not a great sell to men.
But okay, so
80% of women gain 20 pounds in the first 5 years of marriage.
Sure. Yeah, that's no good. They should stay fit.
You should stay fit.
Well, no, they should gain a lot of weight to have children. They should gain so much weight because they're having children.
But this is my point. You're not going to appeal to men by shaming them into marriage.
I'm not shaming anyone. I'm just recommending.
But I've heard you guys say things like you're not like a real man if you don't get married. I've heard this from the trad camp.
That's not exactly true, because some men are called to religious life. Some men are called to celibacy.
Right.
But the ones who are not are called to marriage. Not merely because it's sort of fun, though it's fun, but because it's a natural institution. Because men have certain ends. We have certain goals, right? So one of them would be we want to have children. This is not just a preference, de gustibus non disputandum est. This is an aspect of the natural law.
Don't you think they should follow their purpose in God first?
That is part of their purpose.
Okay. No, I don't think so.
That's what do you mean?
I don't think men's purpose is women. I think men's purpose
having children
is well, why? Why is that their purpose? Even the Apostle Paul said it's better to be alone, or not the Apostle Paul, but it's even
Paul was celibate, yeah.
But
to mention,
sorry,
the Apostle Paul is celibate. But since you mentioned Christianity, it's important to remember our Lord is the bridegroom. The church is the bride. So, from the Christian perspective, marriage is understood to be a symbol of Christ's love for His church. Now, that's the supernatural.
But that's not how it's practiced today.
And some quarters it is.
But you can say my special religion, here's the exception. It's not across the board.
No, my true religion that built our entire civilization. That's what I'm talking about. It's not some eccentric...
too. I'm a Catholic too, but
I'm just describing to you the Catholic view of marriage, which is different than the view you're articulating.
But it's not the way that Catholics are doing it if we have 25% getting divorced. That's not a small number.
Well, it's not the way that 25% are doing it.
It's 30. It's really 35.
Yeah.
But I try to be conservative because I don't want to go back and forth.
But to that point, Pearl, Joe Biden calls himself a practicing Catholic. he supports killing infants in the womb up until the moment of birth as a matter of law. So,
But we get into a tricky territory when you get to play God and decide who's a Catholic and who's not.
I'm not playing God, and I don't decide the magisterium.
Okay.
But the deposit of faith does, the magisterium does, sacred scripture does, the vicar of Christ does, and on this point, all are clear. And by the way, I'm not even talking about marriage necessarily from a supernatural perspective, though I certainly view it that way. But there's also the natural perspective, which is that there is, you say men should follow their purpose and should follow God. I of course agree. So how do we know our purpose? Men have what? We have the scriptures, we have revelation, but we also have our conscience and reason. And so there's something called the natural law. And the natural law inclines us toward marriage. Men and women are, by our very nature, inclined toward marriage. You would disagree?
No.
You wouldn't.
Well,
so there you go.
No. Well, sort of. I think men. Sorry. I think that in the current market, there are just not enough wives to go around. There are not enough wives to go. Women that deserve to be wives. In my opinion. Okay.
Sure.
You'd agree on that, right?
Well, I don't.
So
I don't know exactly what you mean by that. Maybe I would agree, but I don't know exactly what you mean by it.
Okay. Do you think men should have standards?
Yes.
Do you think it's okay for them to want a woman that's in shape? Do you think that's an okay standard?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, a girl that's religious. Would you say that's good? Okay.
Necessary.
But that's not the majority. That's not the majority. So what are men supposed to do in the meantime?
They're supposed to convince the women to get in shape and get religious.
Good luck. I've done it for a year. Good luck.
You haven't had, but maybe the men would be more persuasive than you would to these women.